Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Thursday, April 15th, and we're breaking down both slates that we have over on DraftKings today. We have a nice 6-game early slate starting at 12:10 p.m. Eastern. That is a very early starting time, so make sure you get your lineups in, because usually we see these early slates lock at either 1 o'clock or 2 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you get your lineups in, because this does lock at 12. I think it's the earliest start time that we've had all year long. And the main slate tonight, it's only 5 games, so actually a little bit smaller than the early slate. That'll start at 7:05 p.m. Eastern. So the plan for this video, instead of making 2 separate videos, because no one wants to do that, I just kind of combined it and pretended it was an all-day slate, so you kind of can just decipher it however way you want. But we have a nice mixture of guys starting in the early games and the late games on this video for the pitchers and the bats as well. But that's going to be the way we are going to roll, because I feel like that's the easiest way to do this. So I'm looking forward to it. We got a nice full day of baseball. I'm sure you guys are looking forward to it as well. But if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever these videos do get posted, because they do kind of come out at different times of the day, sometime in the morning, but you never know exactly when. I don't either. It just depends whenever I wake up. And if you want to support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. Join the community of several hundred people. You can get access to the projections, the optimizer, ownership projections, the rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, which is always fun in there. We always just talk strategy all day. It's always a fun time to hang out and have a good time in there and discuss making lineups and things like that. So if you're interested, link is down below. If you want to follow me over on social media, handles in the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you're a free money bonus, do $50 over on Monkey Knife Fight. Use code CPEN using the link down below. But I think that's it for the shameless plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we will start with the pitcher position. And up top on the early slate, we have Jacob Degrom at $11,000. Very, very expensive. And this is more appropriately priced because in the last time he was pitching, I want to say he was in that low 10K range, which is just a little bit too low for a guy like Jacob Degrom. That was an auto play no matter who he was going up against, maybe besides the Dodgers. But even then, low 10K Jacob Degrom, you can sign me up for that most days because he is just such a talented pitcher, arguably the best pitcher in baseball. I say arguably because there's some guys that can give him a run for his money like Shane Bieber and whatnot, but he's been doing it so long, so consistent, it's just hard to bet against Jacob Degrom any single time he is on the mound. And Vegas is loving him here, as they always typically do. Whenever you see a super low total, it's usually because Jacob Degrom's on the mound, because Vegas really has a lot of respect for Jacob Degrom. But a 2.83 implied team total here against Jacob Degrom, pretty heavy favorite as well, and a 9 strikeout prop over in Vegas, which is actually a pretty massive number. The numbers last season were fantastic for him. Close to a 40% K rate, 2.46 xFIP, doesn't really walk too many guys. Low power given up, low batting average, low pretty much everything for the most part. Not a lot of hard contact, not a lot of home runs per 9 innings. So Jacob Degrom pretty much checks every single box for me. The matchup versus Philly, it's not great, but I don't really care about matchups too much for Degrom. The only one negative I have for him, or maybe two I should say, number one, it's hard for him to get a win because the Mets just don't seem to hit whenever he's on the mound. That goes back for a couple years now. And he actually had 41 DraftKings points in his last start versus Miami, strikeout 14. He's on the hook for the loss in that game. It just goes to show how unlucky Jacob Degrom is every single time he's on the mound when it comes to getting offense from his team. So that's one bad thing for him. Also another, I was looking at the early weather. Now I'm recording this the night before, so it's 1:30 a.m., so things can change by then. But as of right now, it's looking like the weather in New York is going to be very, very poor and supposed to rain pretty much all day. Now, that was at the 1 through 5 forecast. I'm not sure how long they're going to be willing to wait. If they wait later in the day, it might end up working out, but that's something I really am not too sure. I'm not a meteorologist, so I'm going to leave this to the guys like Kevin Roth and other guy I follow on Twitter and see what they have to say about this game. But as of right now, it does not look too promising. I want to say like an 80% chance of rain. So it's going to have to be something that we monitor, because that's going to definitely change some things. Because if Jacob Degrom's good to go for this game, he's obviously the top option on the entire slate. If you take him off, it's going to open up things quite a bit. So it's something to monitor, but if Jacob Degrom's game's good to go, he's obviously the ace of the slate. Dropping in a Lance Lynn, $9,400, going up against Cleveland, who just got no hit last night. And as an Indians fan, that was not fun to watch. So I don't want to talk about that too much, because it hurts a little bit inside. But Lance Lynn's a fine option. His last time out, I think we were all over him. I think he was facing the Royals. Pretty chalky pitcher that day. He scored around 50 DraftKings points with the complete game. Got the complete game shutout and absolutely smashed. And one thing I always like about Lance Lynn is that he is an innings eater. He will go deep into the game pretty much every single time he's on the mound. I want to say last year he only had 1 or 2 starts below 100 pitches in those games that he didn't get to 100. he was in the upper 90s as well. So I have nothing really bad to say about Lance Lynn. I love that he goes deep into games. You never have to worry about that because a lot of pitchers, even still a couple starts into the season, they're not going super deep into games, and we see their pitch counts around 70 to 80 pitches. Lance Lynn, we know he's going to be fine to get close to 100, if not more, if need be. In this matchup versus Cleveland, it's pretty good. Once you get past Jose Ramirez, Franmil Reyes, and Eddie Rosario, who were you really scared of in this lineup? The bottom half is pretty bad. There's some really easy outs there. And even the top half, you have guys like Cesar Hernandez, and it's just, outside of Jose Ramirez, Reyes, and Rosario, this is not a very good lineup. So Lance Lynn should be just fine. Is he going to throw a no-hitter? Probably not, but I don't think he's going to give up too many runs. Should go around 7 innings, maybe more if he's super efficient. Strike out like 6 to 8 guys here. Potentially pick up the win. That's a pretty good day to me. Plus, he's around $2,000 cheaper than Jacob Degrom. Maybe not quite his upside on a day-to-day basis, but at least somewhat close to it that you can justify paying $9,400 for him on this slate. Only a 3.5 applied team total against him. Slight favorite in a 7 strikeout prop over in Vegas. And looking at last season, about a 30% K rate, a little bit below that, but somewhat close to it. Didn't really walk too many guys and a lot of power given up. So Lance Lynn, totally a fine option in my books. And especially if Jacob Degrom's game gets rained out, Lance Lynn's going to definitely be a very chalky option there. If Jacob Degrom's good to go, it's going to definitely even out the ownership a bit. And then dropping down to Rich Hill, $9,000. I'll pretty much use any pitcher versus the Texas Rangers. Their offense looks absolutely terrible. I was looking at my daily team sheet, updated the current projected lineups, and versus lefties and righties, they're near the bottom of the league in almost every single category once you get the averages of the entire lineups. And I'm thinking this is probably going to be one of the best offenses to target pitchers all season long. So, and just to show you guys, so you don't think I'm just trying to beef up my Rich Hill play here, looking at their overall numbers, the current projected lineup versus Rich Hill, they're dead last in batting average, dead last in WOBA, dead last in ISO, dead last in WRC+, dead last in slugging, dead last in on-base percentage, dead last in OPS, and first in strikeout rate. Now, if we want to expand this specifically to left-handed pitching, they're still dead last in WOBA, dead last in average, dead last in ISO, 30th in WRC+, 30th in slugging, 30th in on-base percentage, first in strikeout rate. Just looking at some of these strikeout rates, Falefa, that's pretty good at 12%, but then David Dahl's at 30, Joey Gallo's at 43, Trevino's at 20, Nate Lowe's at 70.6%. That's an insane number. I mean, it's really inflating some of these numbers a bit, but these guys do strike out a ton. So there's upside here for Rich Hill. Not saying he's going to come out here, strike out 12, and absolutely dominate the game. The guy is 41 years old. You got to keep that in mind. He is no longer a young guy that's going to find something new in his strut these days. It's just not going to happen. But, you know, he's got a nice curveball. And that's one thing I like about Rich Hill. I mean, he's got one of my favorite pitches in all of baseball, at least a couple years ago. And I was watching him pitch one day. I was like, man, he's just got such a beautiful curveball. It's really nice to see. It's like a rainbow. It's beautiful. But $9,000, it's a bit expensive for him. But the pitching on the main slate tonight is not that great. So I'm not going to really try to get too picky here. But Rich Hill didn't have the worst start in the world last time out. And he's only got a 3.7 implied team total against him in Vegas. He is a nice favorite here, 5.5 strikeout prop over in Vegas. His numbers last season weren't super impressive. Nice 3 ERA, but a 5 xFIP, only a 20% K rate and a double-digit walk rate. Didn't give up too much power, but some overall pretty pedestrian numbers. But he's in a nice pitcher's park here in the Trop. And like I said, I will pick on the Rangers all season long until they show me a reason not to. So Rich Hill, fine option. Wish he was a little bit cheaper. He's a hard to trust pitcher for the most part. He can get a bit wild sometimes, and then could get you into some trouble. But with the way that pitching slate is on the main slate, he's looking like one of the better spend-up options. And then Chris Paddock, $8,700. I'll pick on Pittsburgh. Like I was talking about Texas, this is a team that you can certainly target pitchers with. It's just overall not that good. If you want to look at their numbers last season versus right-handed pitching, definitely one of the weaker opponents in the league at a 25% K rate, 7% walk rate, only a 133 ISO, 209 batting average, 64 WRC+, which is one of the lowest in the entire league, and a 266 WOBA. So even though Chris Paddock has not been very good so far to start the season, it is a little bit concerning, and last year he didn't have the best numbers out there either. He had a nice 24% K rate, which isn't bad. It's not great either, but a 5% walk rate did show good command, but he will give up some power and some hard contact as well. But the thing is, Pittsburgh just doesn't really have too much of that whatsoever. And Vegas is liking him here a little bit. Only a 3.45 implied team total against him, 62% chance for the win, and a 5.5 strikeout prop over in Vegas. And also, Pittsburgh does play as a pitcher-friendly park, which should help him a little bit as well. So I do think he is a viable option on the early slate. Ian Anderson, 8,000 bucks, also pitching on the early slate, but I'll use any righty here versus Miami. I know Charlie Morton did end up giving up 5 runs last night, but he still had 9 or 10 strikeouts. I forget exactly where he landed, so he still scored around 15 DraftKings points. So for giving up 5 runs, that's not too bad of a day. But Miami's not been great versus right-handed pitching so far this season. I know they've been kind of hot the past couple of games. Now one of those was versus a lefty, but they've been hitting well. I will say that. It's definitely a park upgrade going from Miami to Atlanta. I just favor lefty power, but Ian Anderson's a guy that can certainly rack up some strikeouts here and have an overall pretty strong game. Also really like this price point as well. I think this should lead to some pretty heavy ownership at 8,000 bucks. Does great as a pretty good point per dollar option play in my opinion, but only a 3.4 implied team total against him, a decent size favorite, 6.5 strikeout prop over in Vegas. And looking at his numbers last season, a 30% K rate, 3.45 xWHIP, had a sparkling ERA below 2. Double-digit walk rate, which I don't love, but didn't give up any power whatsoever. Got a lot of ground balls, only a 25% hard contact rate, and kept the ball in the yard as well. So Ian Anderson versus the Miami Marlins, who have struggled versus right-handed pitching this season, even though they had a decent game last night. I think he's a really solid option at only $8,000. And then on the late main slate, we have Patrick Corbin, 7,800 bucks. Not a lot I like for the pitching on the late main slate. So the two guys I'm looking at right now are the lefties, Rich Hill and Patrick Corbin. And I'm not sure how I feel about Patrick Corbin because he was not very good last season. Definitely a drop off from what we would come to expect from Patrick Corbin, one of the better pitchers in baseball. But last season, pretty bad year. 4.12 xFIP, only a 20% K rate. Didn't really walk too many guys, but he gave up over a 300 batting average, 357 WOBA, 49 slugging, and close to a 200 ISO with a lot of hard contact and nearly 1.5 home runs per 9 innings. So definitely not the Patrick Corbin that we would have thought we would have saw in 2020. Now, it was an abbreviated season, but it was still a 65-inning sample size, which isn't a lot, but it's still some pretty concerning numbers. And his first start this year, he kind of got delayed a little bit because of all the COVID issues that the Nationals had, but he kind of sucked in that game. Now, you got to keep in mind, he was facing the Dodgers, the best offense in baseball. Now, they're not as good versus lefties than they are versus righties, but it's still a good lineup versus left-handed pitching. So he got beat around a little bit. I'm willing to give him a pass just because it's the Los Angeles Dodgers and they can beat up on any single pitcher out there. So we'll give him a pass. I do think he's a viable option here versus the Arizona Diamondbacks. Not the best lineup in the world. They do have a team total below 4, which I do like. He's a slight favorite and a 6.5 strikeout prop over in Vegas. So with the way the slate is on the main slate, there's just not that many exciting options. So I can see a lot of people going Rich Hill and Patrick Corbin, just kind of picking on matchups for the most part. And these guys can just get you a handful of strikeouts, maybe be in line for the win, or just not get beat up too much, which I don't think they will in their respective matchups. I think that makes them fine options for their price points on their own respective slates. But that's going to be it for the pitching, so I think without further ado, we can move on to the bets. And as per usual, we'll start with the catcher position, move around the diamond, and hit the outfield as well. But up top, we have Will Smith at 4,800 bucks. Should be batting in a pretty prime spot in the order, as opposed to most catchers, although Travis d'Arnaud should be batting in a nice prime spot as well. And these guys are really similar plays in my opinion because they both hit righties better than lefties, but they're both facing lefties. But there's just not that many good catchers to play every single day. If you want to go with the cheap punt option at catcher, I have nothing against that. I just don't list them because they're kind of all the same for the most part. Sometimes, some days, there's like a clear standout option for value at catcher, but as of right now, it's kind of just let's see who makes the lineup. But these are the guys in the mid-range and the upper range that I do think are viable. Will Smith versus Austin Gomber. His numbers weren't terrible last year, and he had a decent start last time out, but they still have a team total of about 5, and it's the Dodgers. They can hit anybody, so not going to be too concerned there. And I do prefer the Dodgers versus right-handed pitching rather than lefties, but these guys should still be fine. Will Smith does hit righties better compared to lefties. If you want to look at his splits last year, just to prove it to you, I can. So versus lefties last season, 294 batting average, 370 WOBA, 147 ISO, and a 136 WRC plus. These are still good numbers, I'm just saying. Versus righties, they are a little bit better. He had a 174 WRC plus with a 350 ISO. Batting average is slightly lower, but the power numbers are a little bit better, and the fly ball rate is as well. But Will Smith's fine. If you had the money for him, yeah, he's the top option at catcher on the late main slate. I don't think there's any questions about that. The problem is he's just super expensive, and I'm not sure if you're going to have all the funds in the world to make that work. If you do, great. If not, I don't think it's going to be a big deal. Travis d'Arnaud, 4,400 bucks. Now, while his splits are nearly like Will Smith, where Will Smith's still pretty good versus lefties last season, but a little bit better versus righties, Travis d'Arnaud actually had some pretty bad numbers versus lefties. It was great versus righties, but versus lefties, 235 batting average, only a 229 WOBA, 0 ISO, 37 WRC plus, and a 30% K rate. So yeah, kind of sucked last year versus left-handed pitching, but I still think he's a viable option. He's got a 4.5 implied team total in Vegas, which isn't super impressive, but it's not like it's below 4, so 4.5 is respectable compared to a lot of the teams that we have on that slate, because as of right now, not a lot of teams have super high implied team totals outside of the Dodgers. Now this Kansas City-Toronto game doesn't have any totals out yet, and I could actually see that being a pretty strong game to target for fantasy purposes. Wouldn't be surprised if we see that sitting at around 9.5 to 10, because both pitchers on the mound aren't that great. We have Tanner Roark and Jacob Junis. Both guys are a little bit hittable, so I think this could be a pretty popular game to target. But I forget why I even started talking about them, but we'll get to it when we get to it. And then to round out the catchers, we have Sean Murphy, $3,700. The Oakland Athletics are looking like a pretty strong team to target on this one versus Skubal. He's a fine young pitcher. He does have a decent strikeout rate, but he will give up power to right-handed bats. And the Oakland A's do have a lot of those at some pretty decent prices. So Sean Murphy, $3,700, does hit lefties pretty well. Looking at his splits last season versus them, for a catcher, they're pretty good. A 235 batting average, a little bit low, but a 206 ISO, 111 WRC plus. Strikeout a ton, but still overall a fine option, especially if you are stacking up those A's. Going down to first base, we have Carlos Santana, $4,200. And like I was saying earlier, I think this is going to be a pretty decent game to target. Tanner Roark's not a pitcher that I would ever shy away from. I wouldn't mind stacking against him most days. So Carlos Santana, while he does have a pretty low batting average, he's a guy that knows how to get on base and doesn't really strike out too much. I think he's a pretty fine option for that $4,200 price tag. Because looking at Roark's numbers last season, he had a 6.8 ERA, a 5.84 xFIP, 19% K rate, double-digit walk rate, gave up over a 300 ISO, over a 300 batting average, 613 slugging, and a 417 WOBA. So you can certainly look to use some Royals on today's slate. I do think they're going to end up being one of the better stacks. I do think their team total could approach close to 5 once we get that posted. Josh Bell, $3,600. The Washington Nationals are looking like one of the better stacks on that slate as well. They're going to be in the late main slate. I'm noticing a lot of the bats that I have here are on the late main slate, so it kind of makes sense because the early slate's got a lot of good pitching, so that would mean there's not that many good bats to choose from. The late slate doesn't really have that many great pitchers, so there's a lot more bats to choose from. So it looks like bats are going to be a little bit more tricky on the early main slate, but we'll get to that eventually. But anyway, Josh Bell, I like the price point here. Should be betting cleanup for a team that I actually like quite a bit. I do like the National stack versus Merrill Kelly. Not that Merrill Kelly is the worst pitcher in the world, but we'll give up quite a bit of hard contact. Not the highest strikeout rate in the world. He doesn't really walk too many guys, so he's going to give you pitches to hit. And I do prefer Josh Bell versus right-handed pitching. They do currently have a team total above 5, so I think the Nationals do make some sense today in Josh Bell. I could end up seeing have some decent ownership at $3,600. Righty Tellez, $2,900. He's just cheap righty power versus Jacob Junis. Not an awful pitcher, but he's pretty mediocre at best. I know he had around 20-some DraftKings points in his last start, but I'm not going to really shy away from Jacob Junis here. And at $2,900, I think you can certainly use a couple of Blue Jays bats here, and especially Tellez at that price point. Then dropping down to second base, we have Brandon Lowe, or Lau. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's Brandon Lau. Then there's Nate Lowe. I always get those guys mixed up. But he actually homered last night. Took him a while, but I think he was the only run that the Rays had. It was a pretty disappointing performance for them because I did have them as one of my favorite stacks in the slate, and it just did not end up working out. Neither did a lot of the stacks that I liked last night. The Braves underperformed, the Rays underperformed, the Astros did nothing. Now, obviously, they took a hit once they got hit with the COVID. I think it was Yordan Alvarez, Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve, Martin Maldonado. They all ended up getting ruled out. So there was a pretty interesting lineup rolled out. I believe Straw was leading off. Then we had Diaz in there, Toro. I want to say Ronnie Dawson made the lineup as well. It was obviously a much worse lineup than what it could have been. So upside got a little bit shattered there. But yeah, it was a bad day for stacks for the most part. But Miami, they hit again, and the Dodgers, I think, were putting up some runs early on. I don't know how that game's ended so far, but anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent. So anyway, Brandon Lau, fine option here. I don't really respect Jordan Laus too much as a pitcher, so we can certainly look to target against him. It's not a hitter-friendly park at the Trop, but Laus is a guy that's not going to strike out a bunch of guys. He's going to give you pitches to hit. Looking at his splits last season versus left-handed bats, it wasn't very good. It was good for Lau, but not good for himself. Only a 12% K rate, 5.93 ERA with a 5.57 xFIP, double-digit walk rate, batting average close to 300, a 150 ISO, and over a 440 slugging. So you can certainly use some lefties and some righties versus Jordan Laus. He's not that great versus either side of the plate. Jake Cronenworth, 4,100 bucks. He's actually one of the few options we've had so far in the early slate, but he's going up against a Mitch Keller for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he's not a terrible pitcher, just kind of the middle of the road guy for the most part. And I don't love using bats in Pittsburgh. Now, it's not like San Diego plays in the Padres. It's not like they play in a very hitter-friendly park either, so I wouldn't really call it a massive downgrade here, but they do have a team total at 4.5, which is a little bit lower than I'd like it to be, but Mitch Keller's the guy that I do think is beatable, and Jake Cronenworth had some really good splits last season versus right-handed pitching, only a 12% K rate, above a 400 WOBA, 265 ISO, and over a 300 batting average, so I think he is certainly in play here. When we look at Mitch Keller's splits, last season it was only a 21 inning sample size, so I don't want to put too much into it, but nice 2.91 ERA, but he was getting very lucky, a 6.57 xFIP, strikeout rate below 20%, 21% walk rate, which is horrendous. ISO above 200, only a 132 batting average though, and a 50% fly ball rate. So I do think there's some upside here, certainly for these Padres bats. And if you want to look at his splits versus lefties, it gets even worse. An 8.44 xFIP, 11% K rate, 21% walk rate, at 257 ISO given up with a 48% fly ball rate with 2.3 home runs per 9 innings. So these Padres lefties are certainly in play for me. So Jake Cronenworth, especially if he's sitting near the top of the order, I think he makes a lot of sense there. Then Judd Lowry, 3,600 bucks, going up against Turk Skubal, two right-handed bats, and Judd Lowry is a switch hitter, so he's always going to have the platoon advantage there. The greatest hitting park in the world in Oakland, but they do have a team total close to 5 here, and they do look like one of the better offenses to target, especially point per otherwise, because these guys are not super expensive compared to offenses like the Dodgers, so it's pretty easy to stack them up. Then dropping out of third base, we have Justin Turner, super expensive, but he's got a lefty in the mound, Austin Gomber, who actually showed some reverse splits numbers last season, was worse versus lefties than he was versus righties. Now, it was a pretty small sample size, so I don't want to put too much into it, but Justin Turner, he homered last night, he's an elite hitter versus left-handed pitching. His numbers last season is 17% K, which is pretty good, near 50% fly ball rate, 52% hard contact rate with a 333 WOBA, 111 WRC plus, and a 149 ISO. Those numbers aren't that great, but we know Justin Turner throughout his career has been pretty good versus lefties, so he's in play if you're stacking the Dodgers. It's just, I hate that price point, so I'm probably going to get there if I'm doing like a full-on Dodger stack, because I'd rather get the Chapman and Diaz at their respective price points, which fit in your lineups a lot easier. But Chapman, 4,300 bucks, going up against a lefty, always had some pretty good splits versus left-handed pitching. If you want to look at his numbers specifically versus lefties, last year wasn't so great, but it was only a 23 plate appearance sample size, so I'm not going to look too much into it, but he can hit lefties well. He's a big fly ball guy to lefties, so I definitely think he makes sense at only 4,300 bucks, and should be in a pretty prime spot in the order versus Skubal. Then Yandy Diaz, 3,300 bucks. I say this every time, but when you watch him go up to plate, you would think he homers every single time. He is huge. His arms are huge. They're probably bigger than my head. I mean, he's just an absolute monster of a man, but he has like a .05 ISO or something like that. The guy just does not hit for too much power. And he gets a lot of ground balls too, like a 60% ground ball rate, but he hits for a high batting average, doesn't really strike out either, and he does draw some walks, so he's a disciplined hitter. He just doesn't, you'd think he'd have a lot of power, and he does not. It's weird. I don't get it, but Jordan Lyles, 3,300 bucks, should be batting cleanup, or at least close to it, probably 4th or 5th. We do see him lead off sometimes, but I don't think that's going to happen versus the righties. So Yandy Diaz, though, at 3,300 bucks, good price point, team total close to 5 here. I think he certainly makes sense versus Jordan Lyles. And then dropping out a shortstop, if you want to spend all the way up, we have Trey Turner at nearly $6,000, but he is on a stack that I like quite a bit today. Team total close to 5. I like Merrill Kelly is a terrible pitcher, but I'm always going to give the advantage to Trey Turner versus most pitchers. He was elite last season, close to a 340 batting average. He had an OPS close to 1,000, a really low strikeout rate. I think it was only at 13.9%, and overall some really elite numbers, and you have power and speed upside there as well. So if you can get some on the base, you always have that stolen base upside, which is always a nice added bonus with your players. Then Bo Bichette, 4,900 bucks. If you played the early slate, you wanted Bo Bichette on your lineup because he had a double down performance, hit the walk-off home run to win them the game, and he got a stolen base as well. I think he had like 32, 36 fantasy points, which was pretty darn good. He was a little bit cheaper, I think, as well. But 4,900 bucks versus Jacob Junis, those think he's a fine play. Plenty of power, and he's just an overall a very, very strong hitter. And I do think the Blue Jays will have a decently high team total once that gets released. Unfortunately, they're not playing in that, high school field that they're playing in Florida. They're going to be in Kansas City, so that's definitely a park downgrade here, but it's still a fine option. Then Elvis Andrus, 2,900 bucks. If you're looking for a dirt cheap shortstop, he's on a team that I do like quite a bit for the Oakland A's. Only $2,900. Going to be hitting at the very bottom of the order, but you can use him versus a lefty. And plus, if you want to do like a wraparound stack, you could, stack the 1 through 4 guys and throw Andrews on at the bottom, and you're still kind of in sequence there. So I wouldn't hate that idea either. Then dropping down to the outfield, we have a laundry list of guys, but keep in mind, I am trying to mix a couple guys starting in the early slate as well. But Juan Soto, $6,000. If money wasn't an issue, he's pretty much the top spend up for me on the late slate, just because he's pretty much one of the best hitters in all of baseball. He's on a team that I do like quite a bit tonight, but just looking at his numbers last season, 200 plate appearance sample size, 351 batting average, well close to 500, a 350 ISO, over a 200 WRC plus, OPS of 1100, close to 1200, 20% walk rate and a 14% K rate. Soto is just a fantastic player, and I have nothing bad to say about him besides that price point. So it's probably going to be pretty hard to get up to him, but if you're stacking the Nationals, you can't leave off Soto. I mean, you can if you want to get a little bit weird, just get a cheap mini stack with them. But if you're full on stacking them, you can't leave him out because he's a guy that's going to keep that offense going, getting home runs, RBIs, and things like that. Then dropping down all the way from $6,000 to $4,800, we have Trent Grisham leading off here versus Mitch Keller. And I kind of already talked about that earlier with Jake Cronenworth, but Mitch Keller sucks versus left-handed bats. I know it's not the best park in the world to use bats in Pittsburgh, but I think the lefties are certainly viable here, and Trent Grisham's got some good splits versus right-handed pitching. Austin Meadows, I talked about this earlier with Brandon Lau, but Jordan Lyles is not a pitcher that is scaring me. Now, Wes Benjamin, the lefty, typically follows Jordan Lyles, so that's going to be a downgrade for the lefties in this lineup, but even if we get like 4 to 5 innings, that's going to be good enough for me. In that Texas bullpen, if they can get rid of Benjamin quick, I mean, it's not very good either, so we can certainly pick on the Rangers. And Trent Grisham, or I'm sorry, not Trent Grisham, Austin Meadows, it's definitely a fine option here. Should be leading off versus the righty. Kyle Schwarber, $4,600. I've mentioned this a lot, but I do like the Nationals quite a bit. And Merrill Kelly, we can certainly use some lefties and righties versus him, but Kyle Schwarber has always hit righties well for power. Then Max Kepler, he's on the early slate. Garrett Richards, back in the day, I used to like Garrett Richards quite a bit, but he's had some injuries. He's just not that great of a pitcher these days. And Max Kepler does crush right-handed pitching, has some pretty elite numbers versus them the past couple of seasons. Going to hit near the middle of the order here, so there's going to be plenty of RBI opportunity, and I think he's a pretty solid play versus Garrett Richards. And Chris Taylor here, if you want a cheap piece of that Dodgers offense that I haven't talked too much about, just I kind of prefer them versus righties. But Chris Taylor's got some fine splits versus lefties. Actually, was really good versus righties last season. Not as good versus lefties, but still we get the righty on lefty matchup versus Gomber here, so I think he is certainly in play. Mark Canha, I apologize, I've never really heard his last name, but I do like him leading off here versus lefty and Skubal. Only $4,100. Got some decent splits versus left-handed pitching. I think he makes sense. And if you're stacking up the A's, you don't want to really leave off the leadoff hitter in your stacks. Ramon Laureano, $3,800. He's got a nice lead in steals so far this year. I think last time I looked, he had 7 or 8, which was a nice jump on the entire field. So if he gets on base, there's always some stolen base upside, which does boost his floor a bit. And, batting second, only $3,800 for one of my favorite stacks in the entire slate. Certainly is viable there. Then Jory Solaire, $3,400. Going up against Tanner Roark. I haven't mentioned too many Royals, but they are certainly stackable. You could use Whit Merrifield, Salvador Perez, Jory Solaire, who I just mentioned, Andrew Benintendi, Carlos Santana. All those guys are viable. It's just that I want to list them all because they're not my favorite stack, but they're certainly in play versus Tanner Roark, who will give up plenty of power to both sides of the plate. And Jory Solaire, past few seasons, has shown more power to righties than lefties. So at $3,400, if you're stacking up the Royals, he's a nice power piece in that lineup. You could also use him as a one-off as well if you're just hunting a cheap home run. AJ Pollock, $3,400, always in play versus lefties, has always had some really good splits versus left-handed pitching. Last season, it was only a 60 plate appearance sample size, but I had an 818 slugging, only a 15% K rate, OPS close to 1200, and a 473 ISO with a 345 batting average. So AJ Pollock certainly in play for a $3,400 price point on the Dodgers. Then Stephen Piscotty, $2,400. He homered a couple days ago, and he didn't have a bad start either that one night when the A's were super chalky versus Madison Bumgarner, but $2,400. Usually hitting near the bottom of the order for them, but he still just got cheap righty power versus lefty Tarek Skubal. Will struggle with right-handed bats. But with that being said, guys, I think that's going to be it for the video. So I hope this was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. If you want to follow me over on social media, the handle's in the bottom right corner of your screen. Pennell16 on Twitter and CPen16 over on IG. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that to get the projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, and all that fun stuff. And I'm going to stop rambling I'm going to get out of here, let you guys go. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the full slate of baseball, which I'm sure you guys will. But I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.